Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Fellas YouTube channel. My name is Cameron Lawrence, and we are back with our Week 7 buy lows, sell highs. We're going to be making some moves, finding some players that are going to put you in a position to go and win that championship, because that is what it's all about. Before we jump into them, because we're just going to cruise right through these 6 players, make sure you turn on those notifications. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single chance to better your team this offseason. Also, on this video, drop some recent trades that you've completed below. I would love to review them, comment, give you a grade on each of them. So make sure that you drop those trades that you've completed down below in those comments. But our first buy low is Brandon Aiyuk. And I know what you're thinking, especially if you've watched my previous buy low, sell high videos. Cameron, are you kidding me? You just told me to sell high on Deebo Samuel a couple weeks ago. Last week, you told me to sell high on George Kittle because there's too much target competition. And now you want me to buy in on Brandon Aiyuk? Yeah, I do, because the target competition for those two guys is coming from Brandon Aiyuk. Over his last 5 weeks, last 5 healthy weeks, I should say, 8 targets, 6 targets, 6 targets, 7 targets, 10 targets. In his last 4 games, 129 yards, 148 yards, 58 yards, and 76 yards. Brandon Aiyuk is the guy that is getting it done on the offense. He is the guy that Brock Purdy is consistently looking to get it done. In the NFL right now, there are 2 players who have 50% of the air yards on their team when they're healthy. It is Cooper Kupp and Brandon Aiyuk. 2 players, that is it. So what that means is that when Brock Purdy's throwing the ball downfield, he's throwing to Brandon Aiyuk, who is open all the time. And on top of that, CMC, Deebo, both banged up right now. Not supposed to be long-term injuries, but that just kind of sweetens the pot. He sees Minnesota and Cincinnati in his next 2 games. 2 games that he can absolutely exploit. 2 games that are going to slam this buy low window shut. In his last game, right, only 76 yards. That was a 37% target share, and he saw 3/5 of the team's receiving yards. Brock Purdy only threw for like 125 yards. So for the fact that he was able to muster up 76 receiving yards in a game where Brock Purdy was pretty much just shut down is pretty exciting. His playoff schedule, he sees Arizona, Baltimore, Washington. As a receiver, that might be one of the best schedules that you can ask for come playoff time, and he's averaging over 7 targets a game right now with Brock Purdy. He's by far his favorite target. He's seeing red zone targets, and he's being used down the field. Brandon Aiyuk is only going to continue to have better weeks coming up, so you need to buy low right now on Brandon Aiyuk. Our next sell high is another exciting wide receiver, and it's George Pickens. The reason I want you to sell high on George Pickens is because he's not seen the greatest target share right now that Brandon Aiyuk has seen. And he has Deontay Johnson and Pat Freiermuth returning this week. He only has 1 game so far this season with over 5 receptions. Obviously, the thing with George Pickens, the reason he's been good so far this year is he can break a big play at any time. He has that big play ability. But if he doesn't break a big play, he's a single-digit fantasy player. He's done that twice so far this season. His 2 biggest games so far this season, his yards per reception were 31 and 22. That is not something that is sustainable or really repeatable week after week. That is pushing more towards like a Gabe Davis type of area. Gabe Davis, and if you had Gabe Davis last year, you remember there were some great weeks that he had, but it was when he was on your bench. And there were some stinkers that he had that you would try and keep it up or see if he could keep it up, and he just wouldn't. Now Deontay Johnson is returning. Deontay Johnson is a target hog in this offense. No matter what you want to say, I know Pickens was a rookie last year, but even in week 1, Deontay Johnson had more targets in 2.5 quarters than Pickens had over the entire game. And on top of all of this offense just isn't very good. So you bring back Deontay Johnson, you bring back Pat Freiermuth, and then you have George Pickens as well. And just not a great offense. there just isn't a ton of upside here from George Pickens unless he breaks a big play, and I'm not going to count on that week after week. So I'm going to sell George Pickens right now as a top 20 wide receiver, hoping to get a wide receiver 2 in return. Our next buy low is Jonathan Taylor, which means at the same time, I think you should sell high on Zach Moss if you have somebody going, hey, you know what? It looks like Zach Moss is taking over for Jonathan Taylor, because he's not. Jonathan Taylor, week 1 that he came back. So that was week 5. Outsnapped 53-10. In game 2, that was only 39-30. He was only outsnapped 39-33. Opportunities in the last game that he saw. He went 8 carries for 19 yards. Abysmal. Zach Moss, 7 carries for 21 yards. That's not much better. He had 5 receptions on 6 targets for 46 yards. That is something you like to see. Zach Moss, 6 receptions on 7 targets for 38 yards. The difference was, the reason Moss outscored him by a lot was he scored a touchdown. It makes perfect sense. Moss was the one that found the end zone. Jonathan Taylor did not. But we're already seeing the snaps start swinging back into Jonathan Taylor's favor. On top of that, they just paid Jonathan Taylor the bag. So they're not going to rush him back because they don't want him to be hurt again right after they just paid him. But at the end of the day, at the end of the year, they're going to be giving him the work. You don't pay a guy $14 million a year at the running back position if you don't plan on giving him the work. He now has Gardner Minshew playing for what looks to be maybe the rest of the season. And Gardner Minshew just had 13 checkdowns, in this last game. If that keeps up, if he keeps the receiving game going, even if he's splitting 60-40 with Zach Moss, Jonathan Taylor is going to get enough work to stay elite in fantasy football. He should be breaking back in, my prediction, into the top 10 again. He does play Cleveland this week and New Orleans the week after. So he's got 2 tough matchups coming up. However, we saw it with Breece Hall. We saw it with Josh Jacobs. You don't exactly know when they're going to break out. Obviously, Breece did it against Denver, so that's a different story. You saw it was a little easier matchup. But once they break out, once they have that game, that buy window slams shut. There is no more. You can't go trade for Breece Hall right now. Breece Hall is looked at by most who have drafted him as a top 5 running back at this point. You can't trade for Breece Hall anymore. You probably can't really trade for Josh Jacobs right now. And we saw it with Josh Jacobs too, and we saw it with Breece Hall. It does take them a little bit of time to get going. You miss training camp, you're not going to be fresh right away. And that's okay. That's what we've seen with Jonathan Taylor. And if you don't have him on your team, this is what gave you the buy low window. I talked about with George Pickens, reference this player as our next sell high, but it's Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis is the definition, as Lucas said on the podcast yesterday, of touchdown dependent. You Google touchdown dependent right now, it's Gabe Davis. 4 touchdowns in 4 weeks. So yeah, that is going to catapult you into the top 15 for a while, but he's currently the wide receiver 23. He scored 4 touchdowns in 4 weeks, and he's not even a top 20 wide receiver. He doesn't have to go this week. I'm not saying you have to sell him this week. That's something I want to clarify quick. I don't think Gabe Davis is a must sell right now. Obviously, he had a rougher week this last week, but I do think he scores a touchdown. He has 15 fantasy points. I would look to ship him off immediately, and if you can ship him off right now, coming off that 4-game high, someone thinks, hey, look, Gabe Davis is the wide receiver, cemented wide receiver 2 in Buffalo. I want a piece of that. Then you ship him off. But he only has 3 weeks in top 25 finishes. He only has 2 games with more than 3 receptions on the season. He only has 1 game with more than 7 targets. And he has scored 30% of his points off of touchdowns. Last season, Davante Adams was the only wide receiver in the top 30 to score more than 25% of his points off of touchdowns. He scored like 25.1%. And Davante Adams saw 180 targets. Gabe Davis is not seeing that right now. So if you can flip Gabe Davis, just like I said with George Pickens, for a top 24 wide receiver, if you can build running back depth, that is exactly what I would do. Now, he's not a bad player to have, like on the end of your second flex guy in a deeper league, but he's not really a guy I want to count on every single week. We're sticking with the Bills though for our buy low, our third buy low, our final buy low with James Cook. Now you see, Cook is a guy that if you're buying low, you're buying for a steady running back too. We talked about Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor, I'm willing to pay, still a pretty good penny to get him. I would still pay a decent amount for James Cook. But the difference is the expectation when buying these running backs, right? I'm not telling you to buy James Cook to be a running back 1. No, I'm telling you to buy James Cook with the expectation that he's going to be a steady running back 2 on your team. The worry with James Cook right now, the hope that you are hoping that your league mates are fearing that James Cook's snap count is decreasing. And after 2 single-digit games, they might be worrying about a 190-pound running back. He has 4+ targets in half his games as far, and he's still averaging just under 4.9 yards per or 5 yards per carry at 4.9. But he's a middle running back 2 right now with just 1 touchdown. So here's what you're getting with James Cook. All that. I just said like a whole mumble jumble of stuff. I don't even know if it made a ton of sense. But what you're getting with James Cook is a middle running back 2 who is not going to be touchdown dependent, who is going to have receiving work upside, and he's still the lead back in this offense. He's a between the 20s guy on a very good offense with receiving work. So that is what you're getting. That's why you're not getting a Jonathan Taylor. He's not going to put up 3 touchdowns in a week. He's not. You know that going in, though, and that's what you're banking on being able to buy lower on James Cook with. And our final sell high, final guy that we will talk about today is Courtland Sutton. Now, I know you might not be able to get a ton for Courtland Sutton, but his value's got to be at an all-time high right now. Jerry Jeudy is struggling. Jerry Jeudy is still coming off that injury and is struggling. Courtland Sutton is a top 30 wide receiver right now. He has 4 touchdowns. He just put up 15 PPR fantasy points. I mentioned it earlier about Devontae Adams being the only wide receiver with 25% of his points coming from touchdowns. Courtland Sutton is at 33% of his points coming from touchdowns. He is the highest out of any top 30 wide receiver right now. This Broncos team is not good. Yes, they will have to pass, but as Jerry Jeudy continues to get better, as Jerry Jeudy continues to rehab, he is going to take over for Courtland Sutton. I don't think Courtland Sutton's going to see any more 8 receptions on 11 target games. Courtland Sutton's going to be a 4 reception on 7 targets for 45 yards, and hopefully he scores a touchdown. But Sutton right now is on pace for 104 targets, 70 receptions, 779 yards, and 12 touchdowns. One of those things isn't going to stick, and it's going to be the touchdowns. Right? If he hits 7 touchdowns on those numbers, that is a good touchdown season. He's not maintaining 12 touchdowns moving forward. He could definitely be a 104 on 70 receptions, 770 yards, and 7 touchdown guy. But then you're looking at best, the wide receiver 30 on the season. At best, he's at his ceiling right now. That is why you're selling high on Courtland Sutton. You're not selling high because I think that you can go out and get Devonta Smith for Courtland Sutton. I don't think you can, but you can package Courtland Sutton right now and say, look, he's doing well. He's outperforming what we thought he was going to be. And you can package him to go get a Devonta Smith, a James Cook, a Jonathan, probably not a Jonathan Taylor, maybe a Brandon Aiyuk you can package him to go get. So that wraps up our buy low, sell high for this week. Thank you again for tuning in. Like I said before, drop down below your trades that you've completed. I would love to comment on, review some of those trades with you. Add into how many people are in your league. Add into, is it a super flex or not? Half PPR, stuff that would help me make a better, give you more insight on that. And if you have other questions, check out our chalkboard right over there for start sit questions, team review questions, trade questions week to week. But guys, thank you again for tuning in. Tune in tomorrow for the podcast, Friday for the start sits, which is actually, or must starts, which is coming from Tyler this week. Gonna shake it up on you guys a little bit, but we got so much coming out. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on those notifications, and we will see you next week. Deuces.